The following is distributed by the Berean Call.
Again, folks, all of the speakers at this conference I know really well. They've blessed me over the years. But the one speaker who I'm introducing now is new to me, but we hit it off from the get-go. If you're not familiar with our TBC apostasy updates, Carl Teichrib and I have been doing a series on that, and I hope you, if you don't have it, I hope you'll get to that. But anyway, Carl is an incredible young man. Well, I say young, he's in his 50s, but that's young to me. And nevertheless, he is a great researcher. He's a terrific writer. He experiences, he goes out and gets to the people who he wants to evangelize, who he wants to administer to bless. And they're people that most of us wouldn't go there. So Carl is just a great guy, and I know his messages are gonna bless you. So Carl, take it.
It's a pleasure to be with you today. My name is Carl Teichrib, and I'm excited to be participating in this Berean Call virtual conference. I would first of all like to publicly thank Tom, Mark, and the rest of the Berean Call staff for making this event happen, and then for extending the invitation to participate. It's interesting how things have kind of come full circle in a way for me personally. You see, many, many moons ago, Dave Hunt played a very important role in his writings, in his lectures. As a young man from the Canadian prairies, myself, was wrestling through the issues of our time. And I found his work to be very, not just informative, but important in helping me to understand the vital issues of our age, and then the importance of sound study, sound research, and understanding a biblical response, taking upon oneself a biblical worldview. And then this summer, Tom reached out. And we've had a lot of good conversations on the telephone, which ended up resulting in the development of a series of video discussions addressing pressing challenges. And then addressing this through, again, a biblical lens, finding a biblical response, understanding what is taking shape through a biblical worldview. So today we're going to be talking about one of those challenges, the challenge of re-enchantment. Before we begin, it's important for you to know a little bit about my background. As I realize, for a number of you, I will be a new face. I've been researching global transformation, world issues, since the early 1990s. Up until 1997 or so, it was simply a hobby. A hobby as a young person, a man in his 20s was trying to wrestle through, trying to realize and understand just what was happening in our world. And by the mid-1990s, I was starting to write articles on this subject as I was doing research myself. And then in 1997, Gary Carr reached out, the author of En Route to Global Occupation, asking if I would be his director of research and help him do the work on his book, The New World Religion. And I did that up until the book was completed, and then some of the projects that we did afterwards up until about 2001. And then in 2001, I returned back to Manitoba, back to Canada. From 2001 until 2007, I was engaged full-time as a researcher, doing contract research, doing freelance writing on these same topics. From 2007 until 2015, I was producing a monthly magazine, a monthly digest on the forces of change. The publication was called Forcing Change, taking a look at those at that crossroads of how politics, culture, technology, religion, economics, all of these are converging in a way that are, and they are indeed forcing change upon the world. And then how as Christians do we recognize this? How do we think about it? How do we wrestle with it? I also teach a modular course on secular and pagan trends at Miller College of the Bible. And from 2015 until 2018, I was locked away, as my wife would describe it. I was kind of off on a mission, locked away in my office working on my book, Game of Gods, The Temple of Man, in the Age of Re-Enchantment. And some of the key topics that are in the book will come out today. It's important to recognize my methodology, some of my research work, because I'll be bringing in examples that are a little bit unusual. I'll be bringing in examples from my own life, my own research work into this talk and then the second talk. I am a firm believer, if you are called to be a researcher, that it's important to do boots on the ground work. And so over the years, I have attended about 45 or so events of international or topic-specific importance. That includes going to world government and global governance meetings. And yes, I'm talking literally about world government. I have an entire chapter of my book devoted specifically to that movement. It also includes events like the Parliament of World Religions, which we'll be looking at in the next talk. It includes technological conferences, transhumanist events, going to pagan gatherings. And when I mean pagan gatherings, events that circle around the Wiccan witchcraft worldview. We'll be looking at that in this presentation. And then I go to other events like Burning Man, which is a crossroads of many things. I'll be bringing to the table examples from some of these gatherings, from some of these research trips. So why do all this? Why? Why take the time to go through something like this? Why even for you to take the time to sit and listen to this conference? A number of reasons. First, so that you're not uninformed as to the direction of our society, so that you're not uninformed as to what is taking shape at the crossroads of culture. So you can see past the hype, past the rumors, past the sensationalism, past all the social media noise that's out there. So you can connect the dots in your own world. When I give some of these presentations, when I give my talks at Miller College, I shouldn't be amazed, but I'm always somewhat amazed or surprised by how many students will come up and say, "Oh wow, this is in my school. This is what I was being taught. This is in my family. This is my church. Ouch." And then to be warned so that we're not gullible participants ourselves. To recognize also when the culture is preaching to us and what that message is, looking past the packaging to spot the worldview. And then to strengthen our own faith as we wrestle through what is happening in the world around, as we are looking to God's word, to end up ultimately trusting Christ more in the face of a culture that is hostile to the biblical message. And then in all of this, so that you can take a practical approach and be a truth teller, bringing biblical truths into the situations you find yourselves in, because you are a truth teller for Jesus Christ. And then also to be encouraged. Because instead of fearing the culture, instead of fearing the future, let's discover what the trends are. Let's understand those challenging points. And in the process, return back to the biblical message of truth, recognizing that in all of this, God indeed is still in control. He is still on his throne. Nothing that we're talking about today surprises him, not in the least. And the one that you bow your knee to now is the one who is indeed the creator of the universe, and every knee will eventually bow. So let's quickly set the stage for what re-enchantment looks like. First of all, there are only two real worldviews in the world. I appreciate the work that Dr. Peter Jones from Truth Exchange has done in fomenting some of the thinking along this line. He writes in his book, The Other Worldview, "If God and nature make up reality, then all is two, and everything is either creator or creature. On the other hand, if the universe is all there is, then all is one." Now, he takes the approach of oneism versus twoism. I like using the terms oneness versus otherness. Oneness essentially says this: man, God, and nature are all essentially the same. There is no division. At its core, the three realms are the same. The biblical worldview is no. God is distinct. He is unique. He is holy. He is exalted. He is not the same as creation. Now, how you view those two things, oneism or otherness, oneism or twoism, how you approach this will determine your views on philosophy, religion, politics, ethics, law, gender, sexuality. I can't think of a single subject that this doesn't inform in some way or shape or form. And for us as Christians, it's an important reminder that the God we serve is not the same as nature. Genesis chapter 1 brings this out, where we see that God is other than the created order. He is distinct. He is the categorical judge. And by his distinctions, by his creation, even within creation itself, he brings about points of value because he is separating things out. So he creates in Genesis 1, yet remains separate from creation. He divides light and darkness. He divides land, the heavens, and the seas. He brings about distinctions in species. It's very clear about that in Genesis 1. And then humanity is distinct from the animal kingdom. And then there's a distinction in gender. And in all of this, we can start to develop value points, points of reference. This is important because if it's just all oneism or oneness, well, ultimately, there is no meaning. All of this doesn't matter. It's hard to be able to find value or judgment in that. So there is no hope. There is no hope for a better tomorrow because better doesn't exist. Tomorrow is an illusion. Put your hope away. Hope can only be found when there are value distinctions. And God brings that out very clearly, right in the very first chapter. He is a God who is the categorical judge, and he brings distinctions into the natural world, just as he himself is distinct also outside of creation. I love Isaiah chapter 40. Isaiah chapter 40, verses 12 to 18, brings out God's distinction in a marvelous way. We're going to read a portion of this. We'll read those verses 12 to 18. Listen to how God is being compared and then how he is distinct from his created order. Verses 12. Who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand, measured heaven with a span, and calculated the dust of the earth in a measure, weighed the mountains in scales, and the hills in a balance? Who has directed the Spirit of the Lord? Or as his counselor has taught him? With whom did he take counsel? And who instructed him? And taught him in the path of justice? Who taught him knowledge? And showed him the way of understanding? Behold, the nations are as a drop in a bucket, and are counted as the small dust on the scales. Look, he lifts up the isles as a very little thing, and Lebanon is not sufficient to burn, nor its beasts sufficient for a burnt offering. All nations before him are as nothing, and they are counted by him less than nothing and worthless. To whom then will you liken God? Or what likeness will you compare to him? So here God is being, first of all, compared to the natural world. And I appreciate the language. I used to be a road surveyor back in the late 1980s, and that's kind of the flavoring I'm seeing here. God is seeing this all. It's all measured out. He's measured the heavens with a span. He's calculated the dust of the earth in a measure. He has weighed this all. He is now comparing himself to the created world, and he is beyond compare. He is utterly unique. You cannot say that he and his created order are the same. And then verses 13 to 14, God talks about human wisdom and asks the question, who became his counselor? Who instructed him? Who taught him the path of justice? Who gave him knowledge? Look, did God call you and say, hey, I need some advice? No, he doesn't need any of our advice. He's God. And the passage here gives us a stark reminder that this is a God who is beyond even the collective wisdom of humanity. He is not the same. He is not the same as you or I. And then he is compared to the power of the nations. And the nations are as a drop in the bucket. the nations are as that small dust on a scale. You know, that fine dust that doesn't matter, but it's there and you just blow it off and it's gone. That is how he is comparing himself to the power of the nations. In other words, there is no comparison. And then what's this about Lebanon being burnt? Lebanon is not sufficient to burn. This passage in verse 16, and Lebanon is not sufficient to burn, nor its be sufficient for a burnt offering. In that section, God is referencing that even our models of worship do not compare to who he is. Lebanon was noted for its cedars. It was known for its forests. It was known for its cattle at that point in time. And if you would take and mount up all the trees of Lebanon into a monumental altar to God and slaughter its cattle, and you would have this enormous, a mountain-sized altar, a mountain-sized sacrifice to God, you would stand back and go, wow, God has to be here. Look at this. He is saying, no, even your models of worship don't compare. It would be similar if today we would, just metaphorically speaking, tear down every church, tear down every cathedral, from all the materials collected, build a super cathedral, a super church. Something so awe-inspiring, it would drop you to your knees as you walked in. Something so grand, something with such vision that it would be like a psychological bomb, a spiritual bomb going off in your soul. And you would stand there and go, oh, this has to be God. God has to be here. No. God is saying, even your models of worship don't compare to who I am. He is beyond all of that. Ladies and gentlemen, that's the God we serve. The God we serve is not the same as creation. Isaiah 44:6 and 8 says this, "Thus says the Lord, the King of Israel, and his Redeemer, the Lord of hosts, I am the first and I am the last. Besides me there is no God. Is there a God besides me? Indeed, there is no other rock, I know not one." 2 Chronicles says this, "Yours, O Lord, is the greatness, the power, and the glory, the victory, and the majesty. For all that is in heaven and in earth is yours. Yours is the kingdom, O Lord, and you are exalted as head over all. Both riches and honor come from you, and you reign over all. In your hand is power and might. In your hand it is to make great and to give strength to all. Now, therefore, our God, we thank you and praise your glorious name." Colossians chapters 1 brings this into the context of Jesus Christ. God made flesh. For by him all things were created, that are in heaven and that are on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. All things were created through him and for him, and he is before all things, and in him all things consist, and he is the head of the body, the church, who is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in all things he may have the preeminence. God indeed is creator. He is distinct from creation. His deeds, therefore, are worthy of praise. His works, his deeds are worthy of proclamation. Because he is the creator, he is the one to be feared. He is above all things material and even spiritual, as we just read out of Colossians. He has the power. He has the glory, and his is the kingdom. But there is oneism in the Bible. The divinity of man found in Genesis chapter 3. Our fall. For God knows that in the day you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like or as God, knowing good and evil. This is creation saying, look, my eyes will be illuminated. I can be as God. And then in Romans chapter 1, we read of the divinity of nature. Who exchanged the truth of God for the lie and worshipped and served the creature rather than the creator? Take the time this week to read through Romans chapter 1. It is a stark reminder of the era that we live in even right now. as man worships creation, as we worship ourselves, as we declare ourselves to be God. Oneness. I make the argument in the Game of Gods that oneness is the dominant, overriding principle of our age. That man, God, and nature all share the same essence, that worldview is the dominant worldview. It is the worldview of Eastern religions. It's the worldview of paganism. It's the worldview of the occult, where through ritual magic, mankind acts upon and within the all. It's cosmic humanism. It's the New Age movement, the idea of collective humanity. This is our divinity. And we're all evolving into the new I am. Even secular humanism fits into oneness, because ultimately secular humanism says man is the measure of all things. Nature is all there is. Man is just part of nature. We cannot imagine a God outside of creation, and thus we refuse to acknowledge his position. We cannot fathom a God whose existence is not tied to natural processes. Therefore, nature is divine. We can't comprehend a God whose separateness levels out all of humanity before him. Kings, popes, princes, paupers, all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Therefore, we bend our knees to what is created. We choose our own spirituality. And this brings us to the question of re-enchantment. I argue that now we have entered this realm, this age of oneness, and re-enchantment is an important principle within this age. In my classes at Miller College, I have this chart laid out, and my class, they need to know some of this. And so I'm going to throw this out to you as well, because I think it's important that we understand how we have entered into different eras intellectually, spiritually, philosophically. First is primitive paganism. Up until roughly the year 500 AD, this was Greco-Roman barbarian worldviews. This was nature personified, nature deified. We had Caesars, godmen as rulers. And then we entered the age of Christendom from roughly 500 to 1700 AD. Here the church influences state and culture. Here we have Christian institutions, the institutions of ethics and moralities that we recognize and understand coming from a Christian, Judeo-Christian background. God's word is applied to life. Even if you're not a believer, the culture understood this was where we found our grounding, where we found our meaning. This is where we found our order. And then from roughly 1700 to the 1960s is the age of modernity, naturalism, the omnipotence of human reason. Materialism and science is king. Marxism and socialism arise. Evolution arises. We see the separation of church and state. It gravitates towards what is material, towards what we can do, towards what we can build. I make the argument in the book that by the 1960s, that was breaking down, and breaking down significantly. It already was breaking down before. And by the way, all of these eras still have influence and overlap, one from the other. And in Game of Gods, I make the argument that for America, the 1960s became that point where modernity shifted. It moved away. And Vietnam, the Vietnam experience, was that point when America's young people especially were wrestling through, where does authority come from? Where do we get our meaning from? Where is it found? Where's our sense of purpose? And the 1960s opened up a revolution of thought, a revolution of consciousness. And so from the 1960s until today, and I make the argument that is really to the year 2000, but it still is now, we entered the realm of postmodernism. And it rejected Christianity, but it also rejected materialism, rejecting the hollowness that materialism created in our souls. It said there are no absolutes. We have no frameworks. We reject positions of power. All we have are questions, but no answers. And it ended up becoming a vacuum of meaning. And so even at its birth, even as postmodernism was coming into its own age, the replacement for postmodernism was there walking hand in hand, and that was Re-Enchantment, the era or the age of oneness. So what is Re-Enchantment? First, what it is not. It's not the New Age movement, though it fits very well. They are related, and yet they are different. The New Age tended to focus on the self-realization, self-empowerment, self-actualization, awakening your divine self. It was contextually viewed as being shallow, a consumerist spirituality, a thin but long smorgasbord of different activities, different techniques, different ways of discovering your divine self. Re-Enchantment focused on something else, and it focused on the we, the community of all. Our meaning is now found in the universal. We are having a cosmic relationship with nature and even the supernatural. We are all one in essence, and the self, the individual, only finds meaning within the unifying wholeness of we. We ground ourselves in a spiritual, material communion. And it's viewed as social. It's viewed as pulling out of ancient wisdom. In fact, you could call it an ancient future worldview. And we have this sense of magic. We feel our oneness. There is now a return to wonder, a return of mystery, a return of excitement. We're now finding our way forward, and it's developed into a new type of spirituality. It is the New Age, but it's more than the New Age. It's a New Age with some depth. Re-Enchantment dovetails very neatly with myth. This is a section out of my book. Sometimes it's easier to read what you have worked through than to try to verbalize it. And this is one of those cases in point. On page 173 and then over to 176, I work through what Re-Enchantment and the myth look like together. A new context was about to be shaped through an archaic lens, one paralleling postmodernism and the New Age, yet offering a more robust setting for change. It would recognize the technical while affirming the spiritual, merging modernism into mystery and the human with the natural. It would be essentially religious, or better said, mythic, powerfully transforming the psyche of Western civilization through a new framing story. Myth, understood as an information technology, takes upon itself a propaganda quality and becomes a powerful actor for social transformation. It functions as a framing story, not as a tale or fable, but as a way to think and behave. The new framing story really started coming into fruition in the late 1960s and the early 1970s. And in many respects, our Apollo Moon program, for you Americans, your Apollo Moon program played a significant role in helping to rethink where our meaning and purpose comes from. Edgar Mitchell, the astronaut Edgar Mitchell, put it this way, responding to his experience as an astronaut, seeing the Earth below. The experience in space was so powerful, I started digging into various literature to try to understand what had happened. I found nothing in science literature, but eventually discovered it in the Sanskrit of ancient India. The descriptions of samadhi were exactly what I felt. It is described as seeing things in their separateness, but experiencing them viscerally as a unity, as oneness, accompanied by ecstasy. Astronaut Dick Gordon put it this way: people are always asking what we discovered when we went to the moon. What we discovered was the Earth. The Apollo program, upon looking back on Earth, forced us to look inwardly. It forced us to look internally. It forced us to ask the question, what is ultimately important, and to recognize that the Earth itself fits into that function. So, again, Edgar Mitchell. I realized that the story of ourselves as told by science, our cosmology, our religion, was incomplete and likely flawed. I recognized that the Newtonian idea of separate, independent, discrete things in the universe wasn't a fully accurate description. What was needed was a new story of who we are and what we are capable of becoming. what we were capable of becoming, and looking for a new story was unfolding on the shores of California. Re-Enchantment at the Esalen Institute. The Esalen Institute is important. It was started in the early 1960s by Michael Murphy and Dick Price, and it was inspired specifically through Aldous Huxley. Esalen Institute became a convergence point. It became a container to explore human potential. It was a place for new psychology. It was a place for spiritual democracy. It integrated Eastern practices with psychedelics, with the perennial philosophy of Huxley. It integrated all of this within the realm of human potential, finding yourself, your higher self. And the Esalen Institute hosted hundreds of workshops each year on all kinds of transformational subjects. It became a playground for social change agents, for progressive academia, maverick theologians, technology and military futurists, artists, psychologists, spiritual explorers, diplomatic insiders. They were all coming to soak in the hot tubs, to do yoga, to engage in mind-altering substances, to take classes and courses. And this became the professional engine of the counterculture. It really was the springboard for the New Age movement, and it was the launching pad for the human potential movement. The Esalen Institute changed America, and then in turn, the world. They were looking for a new framing story, but they weren't the only ones. The Club of Rome, likewise, in the early 1970s, was also looking for a new framing story. In their documents that made up Goals in a Global Community, this is what they said. Western, developed countries are among the best initial candidates for the myth-making project. The countries of this area will be required to make some significant and sometimes drastic shifts of perception in order for the new international order to be fulfilled. Thus, it is very important for these societies to make changes in their value systems. In addition, a shift in values in these societies should have a great impact on the rest of the world. The Western countries, therefore, appear to be very good candidates for the reception of myths about a global society. Stanford Research Institute, and by the way, there's a lot of overlap between Stanford Research Institute and the Esalen community. Really, the Esalen community is an extension of Stanford. Also was looking at what this looked like. What was the new myth going to be about? And they wrestled with this and put this in their document, Changing Images of Man. And here the new myth would be built on an ecological ethic, all about us being in a total community, life in nature, the oneness of all existence. It was going to be a self-realization ethic powered by human potential. It would be integrative, multiple levels. It would be cultural. It would incorporate personal diversity. It would embrace all aspects. It would be experiential, experimental, open-ended, and it would be evolutionary. Many years down the road, in 2009, the Stanford University Press came out with a book entitled The Re-Enchantment of the World. Listen to what it says and think about how this speaks into the age we're living today. Keep in mind, the book was built around secularism and how secularism was embracing and working through what re-enchantment looks like. Hence, the subtitle of their book was Secular Magic in a Rational Age. If the world is to be re-enchanted, it must accordingly be re-imbued not only with mystery and wonder, but also with order, perhaps even with purpose. There must be a hierarchy of significance, attaching to objects and events encountered, individual lives, and moments within those lives, must be susceptible again to redemption. There must be a new intelligible locus for the infinite. There must be a way of carving out within the fully profane world a set of spaces which somehow possess the allure of the sacred. There must be everyday miracles, exceptional events, which go against, and perhaps even alter, the accepted order of things. And there must be secular epiphanies, moments of being in which, for a brief instant, the center appears to hold, and the promise is held out of a quasi-mystical union with something larger than oneself. By the way, the italics are in the original. This is re-enchantment. This is a new spirituality, one that takes upon itself a sacred quality, one that says we will find our mystery and our wonder in ourselves. Reverend Laszlo, who was a consultant with the Stanford Research Institute's project on changing images of man, and the one involved directly in putting together the Goals in the Global Community Club of Rome report, this is what he says regarding re-enchantment. This is from 2005. Laszlo says, "Why do I think this re-enchantment of the cosmos is important? Because oneness, wholeness, has been around for thousands of years. A sense of oneness can be recovered." This speaks to the mystical age we now find ourselves in. Here's one mystic who puts it in a juxtaposition between Christianity and the new spirituality. The face of Christian fundamentalism is a death mask in the process of taking shape, for it will not be able to withstand the incoming tide of the mystical age. It is sometimes difficult to discern what fundamentalists stand for, except that they are for Jesus and against sin. When the Divine Mother gathers up her harvest during the decades ahead, the chaff of fundamentalism will be separated from the good wheat of the new consciousness and left by the wayside, or else it will be taken up and changed into it. This is the mystical realm. This is mysticism and re-enchantment. The two of them go together. So how can we deal with or wrestle with what re-enchantment is? What exactly is it? It's not easy to nail down in one or two words or a sentence or two, but this gives us a flavor. First of all, re-enchantment is the creation of an ancient future mythos, a reality truth claim, a new story, a grand vision. And that grand vision is our planetary interconnection, our oneness. It's a sacred contract with nature, with natural processes. We could call it a pagan veneration of nature. It's a return to Gaia, to Mother Earth. Our personal values are directed by the crowd, by the emotions of the day. It's a feelings-based, experiential sense of reality. And it's all authenticated by the emotional energy of the group. Meaning is found now in our collective destiny with the universe. We direct evolution. We awaken the cosmos. It has moved from the New Age, I, to the sacredness of community. God does not exist outside of nature. The community of creation, that is what's divine. It is sacred secularism, mystical materialism, immanent spirituality. It is the pagan age of the cosmic we. It is the age of myth and mysticism. I want to jump in real quick into a couple of examples because it's important for us to see this in the challenges of our day, face to face. And so this is pretty much as in your face as it gets. Earth Day. Hi. Who are we celebrating? The creation or the creator? Which is it? Earth Day is important because Earth Day has transformed our culture in the West. The first Earth Day started back in 1970, and it was held on April the 22nd, as it is still today, and it was introduced by Senator Gaylord Nelson from Wisconsin. It started off as a teach-in, a national teach-in. And so students around the country received the the Environmental Handbook. And it was targeting young people to become agents of change. What was in the Environmental Handbook? Well, first of all, the problem of Christianity. You're to blame. What we do about ecology depends on our ideas of the man-nature relationship. More science and more technology are not going to get us out of our present ecological crisis until we find a new religion or rethink our old one. No new set of basic values has been accepted in our society to displace those of Christianity. Hence, we shall continue to have a worsening ecologic crisis until we reject the Christian axiom that nature has no reason for existence save to serve man. Wow! Keep in mind again, who was receiving the Environmental Handbook? Children, university students, high school students. Millions, literally millions of students engaged in Earth Day 1970. and it changed the worldview face of the United States and for the rest of the Western world. So that was the first problem. The first problem was Christianity is to blame. Well, what's the solution? On page 331, let these be encouraged: Gnosticism, Marxism, mystic Catholicism, Taoism, Druidism, witchcraft, on and on it goes. It says all primitive cultures, all communal and ashram movements. And then it went on to explain that life won't seem worth living unless one's on the transforming energy side. The heartbeat of Earth Day really came out in an interview between Christian researcher Carol Matriciana and the actor James Coburn during the 1990 Earth Day celebrations at Malibu Beach. James Coburn told Carol this: Mother Earth is our mother. She's the mother goddess. She's the one that we should be praising rather than raping. I mean, all these people here today are here for one reason: because they're concerned about what's happening to the earth, what mankind is doing to the earth. What we have to do is to be true to ourselves. If we're true to ourselves, we'll be true to Mother Earth. Mother Earth's going to be bountiful. She's going to give us everything we need. She has for a long time. We've lost our way. The pagans used to know how to do it, and the Indians, some of them still remember how to do it. The earth is a living organism. We're killing the one we love the most, and she loves us. We've got to praise our mother goddess. And so, 50 years after 1970, because 2020, that's where we're at, 50 years after the very first Earth Day, the first environmental teach-in, Earth Day is a global celebration. And it is a global celebration of Gaia, Mother Earth. And we perform solemn oaths to her. We sacrifice good works to her. We have corporations that celebrate Earth Day. Your public schools celebrate Earth Day. I've been to churches with Earth Day posters. It's I love the Earth Day. Not I love the Creator Day. No, it's I love the Creation Day. It is where we put our emphasis, where we find our purpose, where we find our meaning. It is back to the earth, back to what Edgar Mitchell was talking about, finding that oneness now within creation. At the 1992 United Nations Earth Summit, in its closing hours, and by the way, the United Nations Earth Summit gave us Agenda 21, it gave us the Convention on Climate Change, it gave us the Convention on Biological Diversity. It set in motion, in terms of politics, it really set in motion the realm of green bureaucracy. Boutros Ghali, the UN Secretary General at the time, closed the summit by saying these words. And if this isn't re-enchantment, I don't know what is. I should like to conclude by saying that the spirit of Rio must create a new form of good citizenship. We must now conclude an ethical and political contract with nature, with this earth to which we owe our very existence. To the ancients, the Nile was a god to be venerated, as was the Rhine, an infinite source of European myths, or the Amazonia forest, the mother of forests. Throughout the world, nature was the abode of the divinities that gave the forest, the desert, or the mountains a personality, which commanded worship and respect. The earth had a soul. To find that soul again, to give it new life, that is the essence of Rio. And that, folks, is re-enchantment. It is an ancient, future worldview. It pulls from the past to find its sense of purpose and meaning. It pulls from the ancient mythical world, the realm of mythology, the realm of mysticism, to try to find this new sense of connection, to justify the new sense of connection. And then at that point, to propel it forward and say, now we need to create our new civilization, our new order, our new way of doing things. After the Rio summit closed, there was an Earth Charter process. Mikhail Gorbachev, Maurice Strong, Stephen Rockefeller pulled together a group of eminent personalities and engaged in a consultation process that went around the world looking to draft, and it took them a long time to draft an Earth Charter. And this Earth Charter became like soft law, a type of a declaration that could be used to help solidify and justify other more hard law realities. It became a declaration on the primacy of Earth. It was religious pluralism was really integrated into the Earth Charter process. And Mikhail Gorbachev likened it to a new set of 10 commandments. And he described this as the Earth Charter shifting the moral and spiritual and behavioral activities of people. It was recognized that the Earth Charter would be almost like a new sacred or holy document for a world that was now enamored with itself. In 2001, September of 2001, days before the Twin Towers fell, a group of thinkers and philosophers and leaders within the Earth Charter movement had come together in Vermont. And they had a dedication ceremony, a celebration for the Earth Charter. And they placed the Earth Charter along with a number of other texts inside an ark. It was called the Ark of Hope. Yes, paralleling back to the biblical age. It was the Ark of Hope, and then they carried the sacred object. Actually, they began the process of carrying this sacred object on September the 11th, 2001, when the Twin Towers fell. And so they literally carried it on poles on their backs and meandered over the space of a number of hundreds of miles until it finally came to a resting place in New York City. I believe it was at New York's Interfaith Center. Originally, it was supposed to go to the United Nations, but because of the security issues, they weren't allowed to place the object inside UN headquarters. And then from there, it moved out and was sent to different United Nations conferences around the world. This is religion. This is politics and religion coming together. And that's what Re-Enchantment does. All of this reflects the rise of paganism. And we could call Re-Enchantment a form of paganism because it really is. It's paganism with, let's say, a middle case letter P. What I'm going to be talking about now is the uppercase letter P. In the age of oneness, paganism is on the rise. And of course it is, because this is really the religious outgrowth of Re-Enchantment. So paganism, in the modern sense of witches and Wicca, really came into its own after World War II. And it pulled from theosophy, from the rituals of Freemasonry, and it linked itself back into the pagan religions of the ancient world. By the 1960s, it had become its own viable spiritual movement, yet it remained largely outside of the eyes of the general public. Nevertheless, it was growing. And what it really became, and what it ultimately was a representation of, was a religion of nature. And it was always connected back into the spiritual personification of nature. And here's a statement that fits that very theme. We are identified with the great mother goddess. Hans Holzer, in his 1972 book, The New Pagans, writes, "Paganism is on the march because it offers worshippers something the Christian religion cannot offer. It is the only philosophy of religion combining spiritual and physical oneness with the deity." Margaret Adler, in her very famous survey of paganism, and she was a pagan, very famous survey of paganism entitled Drawing Down the Moon, which came out in 1979, puts it this way. The cosmic purpose of neo-paganism is to facilitate that increased awareness, to work for it by supporting all ecologically oriented movements, establishing alternative communities, demonstrating alternative possibilities for survival on the planet, and ultimately awakening Gaia, the goddess, the planetary mind. Over the years, I've had the opportunity of going to a number of pagan gatherings. I've gone to Paganicon in Minneapolis twice, where we are told repeatedly that this is a religion of nature. The Twin Cities is a hotbed of paganism. It's a hotbed of witchcraft and Wicca. In 2017, a report came out recognizing that Minnesota had approximately 330 covens and circles in the state. And at Paganism, the very first time I went was 2017. Roughly 600 witches, Wiccans, heathens, druids were in attendance. 2019, when I went back, there were over 800 witches, druids, and this time including Satanists. It's interesting to be in that environment. And here you have some pictures of some of the things that are happening. The top picture with a crowd is the opening ceremony. It's very lively. There's chanting, there's dancing, there's a lot of movement. In the center of the room, it's hard to see, is an altar. And because that year the theme was about the grove, the rebuilding of the groves, we were all told to envision ourselves as trees with our roots reaching down into the floor and touching one another, our arms all reaching up, touching each other, and spiritually we're all now one. On the other corner, upper corner, is a gentleman pouring a libation offering before giving his workshop on asking the question about the appropriate use of animals in doing animal sacrifices. The bottom, there's a small group. I came upon them in an empty room, and they were singing a chant that went to the effect of this: "Oh, I am that I am," and that repeated, "Oh, I am that I am." We know where that comes from. We know who that is referring to, and yet they're taking upon themselves that identity that they are one with deity. And then the very bottom corner is just simply a witch dressed up for the ball that was going to take place later on that night. Yes, these are real events. This is real paganism. This is not the typical pop paganism, pop culture paganism that we in the Christian world, we recognize, and we recognize the problems with it. No, this is actually deeper than that. This is far more raw. This is far more real. Here's an example from 2019. It was a workshop I attended. Well, it wasn't a workshop. It was a ritual. It was a ritual workshop entitled The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. And on one end, you have a Christian mystic, and he is dressed up as a Christian priest, and he is performing a ritual. And on the other side, you have a Satanist, and the Satanist has performed a bloodletting and is dripping blood. I'm not going to go into the details of what he all did to himself. And during the course of the 1 hour ritual, they both called upon very specific demonic entities. The entities had names. We were told how they would present themselves and what was occurring. What I found interesting was the use by the Christian mystic, and no, he wasn't a Christian, but that's how he was presenting himself, the use of biblical theology. And he was using God's name and its variations. He was referring back to the Bible over and again, biblical theological concepts as a tool to now invoke a demon entity to come into our midst. What struck me with all of this is the fact that what's happening here, especially in his case, is the use of God simply as a force of nature, nothing more. God to him was not the God outside of creation. Rather, God was a force that could be leveraged to now bring other spiritual entities into the room. And no, I didn't see anything. And no, I don't think anybody else in the room saw anything. But let me tell you, it was a very charged 1 hour ritual. And for myself, it was eye-opening to see the fact that, yes, this is real. This isn't just Hollywood. This isn't make-believe. This is myth, religion, re-enchantment, supernaturalism, all coming into one specific place and one specific time. And if you look at the picture, all this is being done in a conference hotel room. 2020, this year, I had the chance to go to Pantheon, the largest indoor gathering of witches in the world. About 2,500 witches, Wiccans, and Druids showed up in San Jose, California. And this is just some of the literature that I pulled up from that event. Again, over and over again, this is a religion of nature. And in fact, some of the workshops I went to at Pantheon were considered pre-events for the Earth Day 50th celebrations that were supposed to take place this year, before COVID came along. So re-enchantment, this is the age we live in now. It is enlightened paganism. Biblical Christianity is rejected. It's outdated. It's irrelevant. In fact, it's even dangerous. Rigid materialism and secularism, that's been rejected. Now we have a sense of spirituality. In fact, we now have new polling categories. I'm spiritual, but not religious. We have readopted pagan myth into the academic, scientific, political, and cultural arenas. It's now returning to Mother Earth, back to Gaia, back to our interdependence, this living cosmos. It's Eastern spiritual practices, it's yoga, it's transcendental meditation, it's merging all of this together. It is all about earth-based loyalties. We have our purpose found in the earth and also in the emotional dynamics of the energized group, the mob mentality, spiritual democracy. And all this pointed to new spiritual and social truths, a new framing story, a new way of doing reality. It's Eastern cosmology, it's mysticism, and it's green, and they're all accepted into one paradigm. Even scientific theory now caters to the mystical paths. We have quantum spirituality and oneness found within the scientific community. We are all becoming one. And that is the dominant worldview, implicitly and explicitly. But we don't have to go very far to look to see this, do we? In the picture, a picture I took at a church about 80 kilometers away from where I live, it advertised last fall, Interfaith Prayers for the Earth. We could all come together on September the 27th to engage in a climate strike. And it made the local papers as pagans and different people of different faiths all came together to this church to recognize their essential oneness and recognize that they are working in service to the earth. It's part of the denomination of the United Church of Canada. And even in their songbooks, their More Voices songbook, they have a song to the Greek goddess, to goddess Mother Earth. Oh, beautiful Gaia. Maybe the real question is, are we pagans? I'm going to give you a couple of examples. I come from a Mennonite church background. And so I'm going to give you an example from within the Mennonite community, the Mennonite Central Committee. So here is a document from the Mennonite Central Committee from the year 2000 entitled Women and Ritual. Allow me to read just a little snippet. We are finding again the importance of our own bodies, whether through the blood of menstruation or the touch of another. We are reclaiming our ties to that great body upon which we dwell, Mother Earth. And it's all about women's cycles and how you can now get in touch with your divine feminine through your cycles. We are the earth, we are water, we are air, we are fire. Then the writer goes on to say, Joni Mitchell and Carl Sagan reminded us, well, that we are stardust. This is not only true metaphorically, but also physically. And it talks about rituals that they were involved in and how they were performed, turning to the quarters, turning to the light, to the dark side, turning to the night. We ended facing the light of the fire in the center, and we were reminded that we need the quietness of the dark as well as the activity of the light. That's pagan. Sorry, that is pagan. Here's another example from the Mennonite Central Committee. Earth Trek, celebrating and sustaining God's creation. Allow me to read a snippet. First of all, just a one-line remark, and then a meditation, a prayer, and then a suggested activity. Keep in mind, again, this is coming from within the Christian community. These connections to the rest of creation forge a kinship between all creatures, birds, animals, trees, mountains, and rivers are, in a sense, our brothers and sisters. Here's the prayer. We are the earth through the plants and animals that nourish us. We are the rains and the oceans that flow through our veins. We are the breath of the forest of the land and the plants of the sea. We are human animals related to all other life as descendants of the firstborn cell. We share with these kin a common history written in our genes. We share a common present filled with uncertainty. We share a common future, as yet untold. No, you're not. Sorry, you are made different. We are, from Genesis chapter 1, distinct. That is a onist perspective. And then at the end of the book, because it has action activity suggestions after each chapter, and this one's in bold, so you get the point. This week, make an offering to the earth in the form of a prayer or some other gift. Okay, back to the real question. Maybe we're pagans. Maybe the question we should be asking of ourselves, are we pagans? Because I just read to you a few examples that would definitely affirm it. So, what is the Christian response? How have we reacted or responded? First, we've slid into postmodernism, just like everybody else. Absolutes have dissolved. We're now seeking after the experiential. We're seeking after mysticism. We're now embracing Eastern spiritual practice into our own congregations, yogas, labyrinths. We have emergent influences. We now have evolutionary Christianity. It's in our seminaries. We're far more interested in social justice themes, environmentalism, interfaithism. So, what is our church response? We're wrapping this up. First, the church needs to rediscover our first love. We do acknowledge Him. We have to acknowledge Him, that He is God, God unique, distinct, holy, different. Second, we need to clean up our own act, don't we? We need to clean up our own act in terms of those expressions and idols of oneness that we have accepted and adopted within our own church communities. And then we need to equip the saints to speak truth into a oneness culture. We're going to take a look at some of that in our next presentation. So then, what will your response be? Hey, you have families, friends, you have your own communities, your own congregations, potentially, that have accepted and embraced aspects of oneism. How are we going to respond? Not react. Respond with biblical truth. Nehemiah 9:6 says this, "You alone are the Lord. You have made heaven, the heaven of heavens, with all their host, the earth and everything on it, the seas and all that is in them, and you preserve them all. The host of heaven worships you." Ladies and gentlemen, this is what we need to do as well. We need to fall on our knees and worship the God who is the Creator and stop worshiping the creation. Trust in the Lord, Proverbs 3 says. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make your paths straight. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and shun evil. So here we have the option. Do we hide our heads in the sand? Because that's what we have done for a long time. Or do we now seek to be an ambassador, looking for opportunities to be truth tellers in the age of re-enchantment? I'm Carl Teichrib. God bless.